Look around any room full of Gen Xers and you'll notice something strange. The generation that lived through punk rock, grunge, and the birth of tattoo culture going mainstream. A huge chunk of them never got inked. Not one single tattoo. And it's not because they didn't have the chance. They had decades of chances. They watched tattoo shops go from sketchy back alley spots to clean, professional studios with appointment books. They watched their friends get sleeves. They watched their little brothers and sisters get matching symbols with their college roommates. They watched it become totally normal, totally accepted, totally everywhere. And still, nothing. No ink. Not even a small one hidden on the ankle. If you're Gen X and you never got a tattoo, you've probably had to explain yourself 100 times. Really? Not even one. And maybe you laughed it off. Maybe you said you just never found the right design. But if you're honest with yourself, there's something deeper going on. Something you've never really said out loud. Here's the truth. It was never about the needle. It was never about the pain. It was about something a lot more personal than that. Let's start with the big one. Permanence. Think about what it actually means to get a tattoo. You're 24 years old, sitting in a chair, picking something that's going to be on your body when you're 60. That's not a small decision. That's you making a promise to a person you haven't even met yet, your future self. For a lot of Gen Xers, that thought stopped them cold. Not out of fear, but out of honesty. They looked at their own lives and thought, I'm not the same person I was 5 years ago. Why would I lock something in forever? People change. Beliefs shift. Relationships end. Music taste flips upside down. So how could anyone be so sure about anything permanent at 22? That's not indecision. That's self-awareness. And it turns out the research backs this up. People who get tattoos young are far more likely to regret them later. So if you ever stood in front of a tattoo parlor, stared at the flash art on the wall and just walked away, that wasn't weakness. That was your brain doing exactly what it was supposed to do. Now here's where it gets even more interesting. Gen X grew up with a very specific instinct. Distrust the crowd. Think about it. This generation watched fads explode and disappear in real time. One year everyone had a tribal armband. Next year it was a lower back tattoo. Then Chinese symbols nobody could actually translate. Then dream catchers. Then couples getting matching tattoos with people they'd break up with 2 years later. Gen X watched all of it. And instead of thinking, I want that too, a lot of them thought something very different. They thought, why is everyone doing the exact same thing at the exact same time? That single question changed everything. Instead of jumping in with the wave, they stepped back and watched it crash. And that instinct, pausing when everyone else is rushing, didn't just apply to tattoos. It shaped how a whole generation approached trends in general. If you've ever felt like the person in the group chat who says, let's wait and see, while everyone else already bought the thing. Yeah, that's the same wiring. Drop a comment right now if you've ever done that. Stepped back from something everyone else was doing just because everyone else was doing it. I want to see how many of you relate to this. Okay, let's go deeper. Because there's a psychological concept here that explains a lot. Psychologists call it costly signaling. Basically, humans show commitment by doing something that costs them time, money, pain, permanence. A tattoo is the ultimate signal. It says, I care about this so much. I'll wear it on my skin forever. But here's the twist nobody talks about. Choosing not to get a tattoo can be its own kind of signal too. For a lot of Gen Xers, having an unmarked body wasn't about rejecting meaning. It was about protecting flexibility. It said, I'm not locking myself into one symbol, one belief, one version of who I am. It was a quiet way of saying, I'm still becoming someone. And this actually lines up with personality research. People without tattoos tend to score higher in conscientiousness, meaning they're more cautious, more deliberate, more careful with big visible decisions. So no, it wasn't that Gen X didn't value self-expression. They just expressed it differently, through choice, not through ink. Now here's something you might not expect. A lot of this comes down to how Gen X was raised to see their own body. This generation grew up watching adults deal with real instability, job losses, economic shifts, families rebuilding from nothing. And somewhere in that environment, a lot of Gen Xers picked up a quiet lesson. Take care of what's actually yours because everything else can disappear. Jobs disappear. Houses get sold. Relationships end. Even memories fade over time. But your body? That's the one thing that stays with you the entire ride. So instead of treating it like a canvas for decoration, many Gen Zers treated it like something to protect. Not because they didn't like tattoos artistically, many genuinely admired the artwork, but because permanent change based on a passing feeling felt risky to something they considered irreplaceable. If you've ever thought, I don't want to put something on my body I might not feel the same way about later, that's not overthinking, that's stewardship. And now, here's maybe the most personal part of all this. A lot of tattoos exist to say something out loud, to remember someone, to mark a turning point, to announce, visibly, this matters to me. But for a huge number of Gen Zers, identity never needed that kind of PR. They grew up before social media existed. There was no pressure to constantly display who you were to an audience. No profile to update. No caption to write explaining your personality. Life was more private. People figured out who they were without needing the world to confirm it. So when it came to tattoos, a lot of Gen Zers looked at the whole idea and thought, I already know who I am. I don't need to wear it to prove it. That's a powerful kind of quiet confidence. And if you've ever felt like you don't need external validation to know your own identity, that's the same trait showing up in a completely different form. If this is hitting home for you, if you're recognizing pieces of yourself in this, go ahead and subscribe because we dig into this kind of hidden psychology all the time, and there's a lot more of you out there than you think. Now let's bring it all together, because there's one thread connecting everything we just talked about. Regret. Modern life sells us the idea that everything is reversible. Careers can change. Relationships can restart. Opinions can evolve overnight. But Gen X came of age in a world where permanence still felt real. They watched parents live with decisions they couldn't take back. They understood deep down that some choices actually do last forever. So when it came to something as visible and lasting as a tattoo, a lot of Gen Zers asked themselves one simple but heavy question. Am I willing to live with this for the rest of my life? And for many, the honest answer was no. Not because they were scared. Not because they didn't care about self-expression. But because they respected permanence enough to take it seriously. So if you're one of the many Gen Zers who never got a tattoo, it was never about missing out. It was never about being boring or uptight. It was about something quieter. A kind of wisdom that comes from watching life long enough to know that some decisions deserve more thought than a trend can offer. That caution wasn't fear. It was wisdom earned the hard way.